For the first time in this war, Ukraine struck Russia with new cruise missiles, and Vladimir Putin was immediately offered an aerial ceasefire. Today, July 27, there are two big news stories that concern Russia's war against Ukraine. The first story is about the military. Ukraine has used the new cruise missile Ruta Block 1 against Russia for the first time, which is produced by the company of a fugitive Russian businessman, the founder of the first private space company in Russia. But now this Russian is on Ukraine's side. The second story is about diplomacy. The United States of America is preparing a new package of peace proposals, and one of its points is an aerial ceasefire, meaning a mutual refusal to carry out airstrikes. This proposal will first be coordinated between Washington and Kyiv. Then it will be presented to Vladimir Putin. And all this is happening on the eve of Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the United States of America, which is scheduled for tomorrow, July 28. At the same time, our defense forces carried out one of the largest series of strikes in recent times. The strategic oil depot of Rosreserve in Udmurtia came under fire. That's 1,300 kilometers from the border. The port and oil depot in Rostov-on-Don, and two more ports on the Sea of Azov. In general, there's definitely something to discuss here. My name is Alexei Pechi, let's get started. But before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. We're moving toward 300,000 subscribers, so I would appreciate your subscription. So, I'll start with the main military sensation of the day. Ukraine, apparently for the first time, used Ruta Block 1 cruise missiles to strike Russian territory. Developed jointly with Ukrainians by the Dutch company Destinus. Founded by Mikhail Kokorich, the creator of Russia's first private space company. This is evidenced by photographs of the missile debris published by Russian Z-bloggers. Ruta Block 1, which became the first public confirmation of its combat use. But besides the Russians themselves, the American publication The War Zone reported that the armed forces of Ukraine have started using inexpensive Ruta Block 1 cruise missiles against Russia. The reason was those very photos of the wreckage of this weapon, in particular the body, internal components, and tail section of the intercepted missile, and they were published by Russian Telegram channels. It was exactly from these that Western analysts identified the new weapon. What kind of missile is this anyway? Ruta Block 1 is a compact ground-launched cruise missile drone. The manufacturer claims a range of up to 300 kilometers and a warhead weight of up to 150 kilograms. The speed of the device is about 0.7 Mach, that is, about 800 to 850 kilometers per hour. This missile uses three navigation systems at once: inertial, satellite, and visual. And the last one is especially important because visual navigation allows it to home in on the target even when the satellite signal is jammed. And that's exactly what Russian electronic warfare does. But a separate question is who makes this missile, because that's a whole separate and telling story. The missile was developed by the company Destinus in cooperation with Ukrainian specialists, but the company is headed by Mikhail Kokorich. He is a graduate of the physics department of Novosibirsk University, who once created the first private space company in Russia, Dauria Aerospace. In 2024, Kokorich renounced his Russian citizenship, and a year later moved the company's headquarters to the Netherlands. And now, the former Russian entrepreneur supplies long-range drones and cruise missiles to Ukraine and European countries. So, the person who used to build satellites in Russia and now makes weapons, which Ukraine uses to strike at a Russia gone feral. The missiles are produced at Destinus facilities in the Netherlands and Spain. Well, deliveries to Ukraine began back at the start of 2024, and that's why this is strategically important. Ruta Block 1 is just the very first, the most basic version of the cruise missile. This company already has a lineup. There's Ruta Block 1, as I said, with a range of 300 kilometers. Ruta Block 2 has a range of over 700 kilometers and a warhead of 250 kilograms. And Ruta Block 3 with a range of up to 2,000 kilometers, which will be tested in Ukraine as early as 2027. Moreover, the production of Ruta Block 2 is planned to be launched by the largest German concern Rheinmetall together with Destinus by the end of this year. The Germans are already involved in this and are actually increasing missile production. The meaning of this whole program was perfectly formulated by Kokorich himself, and I'll quote him next. Europe is entering a new era of defense, where the decisive factor is no longer the possession of high-precision weapons, but the ability to produce, replenish, and develop it on an industrial scale during prolonged, high-intensity precision conflicts. Well, simply put, the winner is not the one with the prettier missile, no, but the one who can churn out these missiles by the hundreds and thousands. And so when Block 3 is up and running, Ukraine and Europe will receive fully functional cruise missiles with a range up to the Urals, without any dependence on permission from the United States of America, which for years, have been twisting our arms regarding the use of Western weapons. Plus, importantly, these missiles are significantly cheaper than American Tomahawks with similar characteristics. So there's clearly a breakthrough here. And that first story leads to a second one, this time a diplomatic one. The United States of America is preparing a halt to aerial strikes between Ukraine and Russia. According to Reuters sources, Washington is preparing a new package of proposals to end the war, and one of its points is the cessation of mutual airstrikes. That is, Russia stops striking our cities with missiles and Shaheds, and Ukraine halts drone and missile attacks on Russian rear areas. The process is as follows. The initiative is now being discussed between Washington and Kyiv. Then, when it is ready and finalized, it will be presented in Moscow during a new round of peace talks. The key context here is Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the United States of America. Today, he is in the United Kingdom, and as early as tomorrow, July 28th, the president of Ukraine is flying to the US for a meeting with Trump, where the issue of a future ceasefire will be discussed directly. And now Reuters sources have clarified that the Ukrainian side is interested in the negotiations but is still waiting for confirmation of the American president's schedule. Now let's conduct a sober analysis. Will it be possible to implement this? Because this format has already been discussed more than once, specifically the format of an aerial ceasefire. There is an important detail here that cannot be overlooked. Let me remind you that Kyiv had previously offered that bald embarrassment Vladimir Putin an aerial ceasefire and he refused. Let me remind you, right before the massive strikes on oil refineries across Russia began, Zelensky directly proposed to Moscow that both sides stop airstrikes. But Vladimir Putin refused and stated that he actually wants more blood and deaths. But now, according to a number of officials, the situation is different. Pressure on the Russian economy due to ongoing strikes on oil refineries and logistics may still soften Moscow's position. So the logic is as follows. Previously, Vladimir Putin had no reason to agree. But now, when oil refineries are burning and Wildberry's warehouses, ports are shutting down there, he finally has at least some incentive. Well, at least to stop the exchange of airstrikes. But there is also a downside that should be mentioned, honestly. An air ceasefire is beneficial for both Ukrainians and Russians, but in different ways. For Ukraine, this air ceasefire saves cities from missile terror. And finally, Russians will stop destroying residential buildings, hospitals, schools, and so on. And for Vladimir Putin, this air truce gives those very oil refineries and logistics a breather. Ukraine is now targeting and methodically burning down. There's a difference. Russians hit residential buildings while Ukraine targets logistics and oil refineries. Plus, let's not forget, yesterday Zelensky announced that Vladimir Putin is preparing a new mobilization and is expecting 30,000 soldiers from North Korea. So any pause could be used by the Kremlin to regroup and prepare for a new offensive. That's why the details and guarantees are important here. Otherwise, this truce will just turn into an operational pause for the Russians. The Kremlin's reaction is still evasive. Today, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Moscow considers it premature to comment on reports of an air truce. But he reiterated that Russia maintains channels of dialogue with American negotiators. Russian officials expressed hope that U.S. Representatives Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will still visit Moscow when their schedules allow. So now this Russian maniac, Vladimir Putin, has started to pressure Witkoff and Kushner to come to him personally to negotiate. This scumbag, Vladimir Putin, it's important for him to show that people are coming to Moscow to negotiate with him personally. Well, apparently Vladimir Putin was really hurt by the fact that back on July 8, Trump promised to call him, and then just ignored that balding loser. And now, here's a summary of what the Ukrainian defense forces have done today and overnight, because the strikes don't stop for a single day, and it's exactly this pressure that could bring Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. Moreover, President Zelensky held a meeting with the military the day before and stated that the defense forces have updated their list of targets in Russia and will only intensify attacks on Russian rear areas. This means that even more oil refineries, oil depots, and Wildberries warehouses will burn all across Russia. Meanwhile, last night on July 27, Ukrainian drones traveled 1,300 kilometers from the border and struck Udmurtia. The head of the republic, Alexander Brychalov, was forced to admit, quote, the most massive drone attack on the region since the beginning of the war. The target of the strike was the Prioritet plant of Rozreserv, previously known as Gorizont, in the village of Borok of the Kambarsky district. Well, actually, it's not just some kind of oil depot, no? This is a restricted access strategic facility under paramilitary guard, designed for long-term storage of fuel reserves, petroleum products, and lubricants in case of emergencies or military needs. This is the so-called strategic reserve of the country. In other words, we are striking at the state fuel reserve, which Russia keeps specifically for times of shortage in the country. This shortage is currently happening in the country. Because of the work of the Russian air defense, by the way, one of the drones crashed into a multi-story residential building. By the way, these are their own defenses. Zelensky confirmed the strikes on oil facilities in Udmurtia and in the Yaroslavl region and expressed the meaning of these strikes with the following phrase: the long-range sanctions plan is being carried out. The second target area tonight was Rostov-on-Don. Drones hit the port and the railway infrastructure of this city. Explosions and destruction were recorded in the area of the city port, and OSINT analysts later confirmed a large-scale fire at the oil depot in Rostov-on-Don. In addition, there were reports of a strike on the Azov optical mechanical plant, that is, a company that produces optoelectronic, radar and high-precision systems, and is part of Russia's defense industrial complex. So once again, we're hitting a plant that makes components for Russian weapons. The third target is the Azov Sea. After the drone attack, 2 more Russian ports on the Azov Sea were paralyzed. This is a continuation of a systematic campaign for a naval blockade, because Ukraine has already blocked a significant part of Russian shipping in this region, and now new ports are being added. Let me remind you, a significant part of Russian grain and petroleum product exports goes through the Azov Sea, and every port that is shut down hits the Kremlin's foreign currency earnings. It's also worth mentioning the overall effect all this has, because a telling detail has emerged here. Due to the fuel shortage, even Russian troops have been given limits on refueling military equipment. The wording in their documents is, quote, there is a catastrophic shortage of fuel. And just think about it. The army of the aggressor country is rationing fuel for its own military equipment. This directly results from Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries, oil depots, and the very logistics network that Ukraine is destroying every night. And this is great news, because before there was only a shortage of fuel for civilians, and now there's not enough even for the military. That's why the strike on the reserves in Udmurtia is a sign that the fuel problems for Russians are actually just beginning. This is just the beginning. By the way, in Crimea today, they have already stopped selling gasoline even to those who managed to buy special QR codes. This means that now there is no fuel even for the privileged. Bottom line, a very telling picture is emerging. On one hand, Ukraine is increasing its military capabilities. The new cruise missile Ruta Block 1 has come into play. Versions with a range up to the Urals are on the way, which will be produced together with the German company Rheinmetall. Ukraine is striking farther and farther. They hit Udmurtia, which is 1,300 kilometers away. They struck Yaroslavl region. And we're hitting more accurately because we're targeting strategic fuel reserves, ports, and defense factories. So much so that the Russian army is already forced to ration gasoline for its military vehicles. That's a great indicator. On the other hand, this pressure is exactly what creates the conditions for diplomacy. The US is preparing a halt to aerial strikes. Tomorrow, Zelensky is flying to meet Trump. And for the first time, there's a calculation that Putin might actually agree. Of course, not out of goodwill, but because the Russian economy is hurting more and more. But here is the key fork in the road, because a halt to aerial strikes will certainly save Ukrainian cities, and that's good. But it can also give the Kremlin a break to restore oil refineries and prepare for a new mobilization involving North Koreans. That's why everything comes down to the details. On what terms, with what guarantees, and under whose control this halt to aerial strikes will be. We will most likely find out about this tomorrow, July 28, after the meeting between Zelensky and Trump in Washington. So subscribe to this channel, we will definitely cover it. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel. Click the bell and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would be grateful. You can do this by making any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.